Hey lovely people! Today's book that I'm going to talk about I have just finished reading, and it is The Praise Singer by Mary Renault.
Sophie Vlogs.
I picked this book up secondhand from the book barn recently. I was actually hunting for Mary Renault to see if they had any of her books, because when I was in, I think, my final year of university, I went to Reading University, and they have a museum on campus, the Your Museum of Greek Archaeology, I think is its full title. But essentially they have a massive collection of Greek pots. I used to volunteer there, and I used to do stuff to do with the pots, and I also helped out at some events that they did. And when I was helping at an event, I got talking to someone who was just attending it, and they asked about my dissertation, and my dissertation was on Achilles and Patroclus and Briseis and the Iliad and everything, and she specifically recommended to me Mary Renault. Seeing as this person was much more learned in the ways of the classical studies than I made a mental note, and I've remembered to this day. So when I was in the book barn, I hunted down for some Mary Renault, and I actually picked up a couple of her books. This one is a standalone one, which is why I decided to start with it. The other one is part of a series that I have 2 books of. This book focuses on Simonides, who is a poet from 6th century Greece. We have some of his surviving works, which I have never actually read a lot of. I've read the odd snippet from it here and there, but after reading this I have made a note to check out his actual work, because that would be interesting. So essentially the book is narrated in first person by Simonides as an old man looking back on his life as a young man, tracing his career. It doesn't go through to the time of his death, but it does hint at things that happen outside of the novel. In my first year of classical studies, they do that thing where they get everyone on level footing, so we specifically looked at 5th century Athens. So I did find this particularly interesting because it's 6th century and a lot of it is set in Athens, so there was a slight overlap of knowledge. There were things that I'd kind of touched on that were in this, and then this alluded to things that I had studied. So as someone who had a prior knowledge of the time, I found it particularly interesting. However, I wouldn't say that you needed to have prior knowledge of the time period or of anything really to do with ancient Greek culture in order to read this book, because I feel like it does a very good job of introducing you to the way that the society is structured, the fact that Greece is not a unified whole, it's the separate islands, the relationship they have with Persia at the time, all of these sorts of topics which you don't need to know anything about, because they are explored in not a simple way, but they are explored in quite a clear way throughout the book, if that makes sense. I like Sim as a narrator. You're quite easily able to empathise with him. Sim starts narrating the novel by talking to us about his childhood, his upbringing on the island of Chaon, I'm going to pronounce it as, could be wrong, fuck it. He grows up spending a lot of time being a shepherd. He doesn't really get on with his father. There's like a fundamental misunderstanding between their personalities. They don't mesh, whereas he almost idolises his older brother figure, and it initially starts by focusing on that and how he discovered his love of song and his ability to remember song, and his first discovery of poets who come to festivals to sing, all that sort of thing. Sim is quite likeable as a result of all of this. He has struggles which we can empathise with, because they're all about the idea of identity and having to negotiate what your family expects of you and what you want to do, all these sorts of things, which are quite universally, you're able to empathise with that. So he starts off as quite a sympathetic character, so he's very easy to engage with as a narrator. I really enjoyed his discovery of what it's like to be a poet, how he talks about learning the songs that women used to sing at work on the island, and then comparing them to the types of songs that poets would sing at festivals, and all of this sort of thing. Whilst I have read various primary texts and poetry from ancient Greece, I really enjoyed the way that this book explored and kind of explained the different times that poetry would be used. As part of the narrative, Sim travels to various different festivals, and each time he talks about composing the song for the festival and what each festival contained, why the festival happened, what sorts of poems would be sung at those festivals and why. So I really enjoyed that way that the book, whilst being an engaging story and had like a good narrative that you could follow, it also was jam-packed full of knowledge about about the different festivals and the way that religion of that time worked and how worship was done through song and the different ways that poetry and song is used in that culture. All of that was really, really interesting. And if you're interested in learning more about poetry and the role of it in 6th century Greece, but you don't necessarily want to read a textbook, then this is actually quite informative. It is also really good as a way of taking in information about the politics of the time. I'm really trying to phrase this in a way that doesn't spoil things, even though it's actually events that happened like thousands of years ago. Essentially, Simonides the man, because he was quite an acclaimed poet of his time, he was sort of quite involved, not in a hands-on political way, but he was just present and alive during quite an interesting political time. So, for example, a large portion of the plot is spent in Athens because he gained the favour of the tyrants of the time, and tyrant is not used in the way that we use it as a modern people, it's used in the way of rulers who gained their rule by force. So the tyrants of the time in Athens really liked Sim, so you're able to learn a lot about the political structure of Athens at that time, how it is relating to what's happening with the rest of Greece and Persia, and all this sort of thing. Essentially, what I am bumbling my way towards is the reason why I really, really actually enjoyed this book is because Mary Renault very clearly knows her stuff. As the back of my copy of the book tells me, she travelled extensively around Greece, so she had a very good knowledge of what Greece was like. There's a section at the end of the novel which I really liked, where she talks about what sources she drew upon for the novel. So, what elements of the story are based on ancient sources, what elements are sort of an invention on her part, and the reason why she invented it for that reason. So where there hasn't been evidence and she's had to make some sort of plot herself, she's explained why she did that, and she's drawn upon other ancient sources which, whilst not necessarily related to Simonides in fact, if you will, you can use in this narrative to patch up the narrative so that it holds together. From an actual writing point of view, I found that Renault writes really well, but also in a way that is very easy to read. I think I read this book in maybe 2 days. Like, I sped through it because it's very... the language used is not... it's not an overly floral language, it's not overly descriptive. It gives you enough description about everything so that you can really build a picture in your head, but it just reads very quickly and very easily, and I just found it really, really engaging, and I couldn't put it down towards the end, really. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I would stand by that. I think it was a solid, above average book, and I really will be checking out more of Renault's work based on this, because I'd love to see how she handles other things. I know that she's also done some on more mythological themes, as well as other ones that are based more in the realms of reality. So I'm really interested to explore her work more, and if you have read any Mary Renault and have specific recommendations, then I'd really appreciate that, because that would be really good. Also, on a side note, I gather that her life itself was quite interesting. There's a biography of her that I have my eye on that I really want to read as well, because I think, for all intents and purposes, she had a really interesting life. Just based on the back cover of this book, she went to Oxford. After her degree, she trained as a nurse and wrote her first novel. Then her next novels were written when she was off duty while serving in World War II, and then she travelled around South Africa and also in Greece, and I think she just sounds like a really interesting person, and like she herself had an interesting life. So as well as having thoroughly enjoyed this book, I'm also really intrigued about the author, and now I want to read more about her and see what her life was like. So essentially, if you're interested in ancient Greece in any way and would like to read some fiction about it, then check out Mary Renault. I feel like all my videos at the moment are all very concerned with ancient Greece. I'm just having a moment. I'm having a revival. I'm like connecting back with all that, and I'm loving it, to be honest. So yes, I'm going to call it a day there. I hope this has been mildly coherent. It has been a little while since I've recorded and I'm finding it strange again. I hope you have a super duper lovely day, and hopefully I will have enough time to record another video so that I will see you next week.